I had a table. I didn't bring it.
Oh.
Hear that. Hear that. Quiet. No shoes scraping or feet shuffling past my house on Beach Street. No wagons breaking. No whoa Nelly. Not even a dog barking, a cock crowing, or bird song in morn's first light, soft as my lemon meringue. It's the stillness before the world wakes up that soothes me. Before the day comes at you like a swarm of bees and you cannot hear yourself think, hear yourself breathe. It's the time I savor freedom. I can do anything, be anything, go anywhere. Freedom, freedom. There was a time when I stood on the other side of freedom. Jamaica, Queens, where I was born, 1794, enslaved to Judge Millington Smith. He born 50 years before my first breath. Old Master was a merchant, lawyer, New York delegate to the Continental Congress. The judge was a big man in New York, this nation. He was the most important anti-federalist bearer's spokesperson. When you serving folks their food, you pick up things, fancy words, and learn how the world works behind the scenes, over supper, billiards, and high tea. Old Master had a central role ratifying the U.S. Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. There are 7 articles. You can look them up yourselves. I don't have time to tell you. But if you want to keep what Old Master helped put in place, vote. Only votes talk. Everything else walks. I can't tell my story without talking about those who I breathe air with, so you can understand where they came from and how I came to be among them. Master was a delegate for the New York Provincial Congress, 22nd May, 1775. He served in the Continental Line Regiment, which he organized as the Dutchess County Rangers. You standing in Clinton County now, but it was once called Albany County, then Charlotte County, then Washington County. Many of the settlers came from downstate, Dutchess County, and Long Island. Old Master descends from Bernard Smith and Margaret Rowe, who begat a son, William, who first married Marie Fevers on 11th August 1625 in Colton, Devon, England. William migrated to New England during the Puritan Great Migration, and that's why I'm talking to you now, because he came to America. William was a big shot deputy, served on Colony Rate Committee, Committee on Wages, Commissioner to End Small Causes, Livestock Appraisal Committee, and Weymouth Magistrate. When his family moved to Rehoboth in 1647, he became a constable, then a surveyor of highways. In 1658, he was a magistrate in Huntington. By 1663, William and Nehemiah, his sons with his second wife, Madeline Crane Olmsted, were granted house lots in Jamaica, Queens. William the immigrant had 2 families, and my Old Master descends from his and Marie's son, Thomas Smith, who married Judith Smith, the parents of Samuel Smith, who married Hannah Denton, who begat Samuel Smith Jr., who married Elizabeth Keziah Waters and begat 7 kids, including Melanchthon Smith, my old master. My old master first married Sarah Smith, who died in 1770. A year later, he married Margaret Mott, and their children were Sidney, Richbell Mott, Melanchthon II, and Phoebe Mott. If you've been to Plattsburgh, there's a Margaret Street, and that's named for my old master's wife. Colonel Melanchthon was first married to Cornelia Herring Jones, daughter of Dr. Gardner Jones, a prominent Welsh physician. She died in 1810, leaving 2 children, Mary C. Lindsay and Rear Admiral Melanchthon Smith, who fought in the Seminole Wars and War of Secession. But I am getting ahead of myself. When Mistress Cornelia died, there were 28 slaves in Clinton County, including me. On the 4th of May, 1816, Colonel Melanchthon married Anne Green, the daughter of Plattsburgh Tavern innkeeper Israel Green, and his wife, Sarah, who were Quakers. Remember this. This is important. Colonel Melanchthon and Mistress Anne had a daughter, Elizabeth Smith Martin. During the Revolution, Old Master was the sheriff of Dutchess County. He took oaths of allegiance from the colonists and arrested and ratted out loyalists and bought up their forfeited land. The Provincial Commission selected him to be the 2nd judge of the Court of Common Pleas. A decade before I was born, Old Master was elected Justice of Peace in Dutchess County, but he moved to New York City to become a prominent merchant. A year later, the judge helped establish the New York Manumission Society with worthies like John Jay and Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton. I whispered the latter's name. He and my master got into heated debates. Old Master was the most important anti-federalist member of the State Ratification Convention in 1788, and he was one of the ablest debaters in the country, it was said. His vote for the Constitution with the recommendation of amendments broke anti-federalist ranks and brought down Governor George Clinton's wrath. He was one of the few important landowners and merchants among the anti-federalists, and Old Master continued in the Clintonian Party. He was elected to the Assembly in 1791 and canvassed the state for Clinton. In 1792 against John Jay. Not bad for one who was homeschooled by his parents, Samuel and Elizabeth Bale Smith, who were Midland, Long Island farmers. Those in the Manumission Society wanted to stop the rampant kidnapping of free blacks in New York City, who were sold south into slavery. In John Simmons' home, 19 men gathered at the first meeting presided over by Robert Troup in 1785. Old Master, like the rest of them, owned slaves then, but not me because I wasn't born. But he probably owned my mother. Because she was a slave, I was a slave. Old Master was appointed to draw up the society's rules, and John Jay was elected the first president. Old Master had many irons in the fire. He was one of the 12 original proprietors of the Plattsburgh Old Patent, holding title to 1,120 acres. Plattsburgh was founded the year after my birth. The Platts, Treadwells, Brinkerhoffs, all those families from Dutchess County and Long Island twined their land interests here. They knew each other before they got here. They all fought in the Revolution together, made money together, married each other's kin. Old Melanchthon didn't get to see slavery's end in New York or the United States. as he was the first casualty of the 1798 yellow fever epidemic in New York City. I was transferred to his son, Colonel Millington, and entered his and Mistress Cornelia's household, which increased when their children, Mistress Mary and Master Mel's birth. Then Mistress died shortly after his birth, and the Colonel married dear Anne, who was only 2 years older than me. In 1811, the Colonel, dark with grief, buries himself in work with his business partner, Levi Platt, the son of Plattsburgh founder Zephaniah. They own a forge, sawmill, grist mill, fulling mill, lots, and a lumberyard. On 18th of June, 1812, the Americans declare war against Great Britain. A year later, British Colonel Mary's troops occupied Plattsburgh for 24 hours and torched the blockhouse, Broad Street Arsenal, Army Hospital, Peter Selly's home, and the Daniel Z. Platt storehouse. War clouds rose like the thickest fog over the Battle of Lake Champlain, September 11, 1814. All the American heroes of the battle, I breathed air with them because they went in and out of Colonel's house until they couldn't. He couldn't. He commanded the 29th Infantry Regiment at Fort Monroe, Plattsburgh's biggest garrison, while his brother Sidney served in the Navy under Commodore Thomas McDonough. The British are coming. The British are coming. By September the 3rd, 11,000 British soldiers camped in Champlain. In Plattsburgh, town people fled to the Quaker Union in Peru. Up on Halleck Hill, they watched the Americans fight for their freedom. Not mine, not yet. No way the Colonel, founder and first editor of the Plattsburgh Republican, was going to let me go to the Union. I could be spirited away by Quakers like Samuel Keyes, though I was 6 months pregnant with my first child. I scurried between the dwelling of my freeborn husband, Thomas Haynes, a respected barber, and my quarters, the slave quarters in the Colonel's basement, in the finest home in Plattsburgh. The British thought so too. On September the 6th, General George Prevost made my master's home his headquarters, forcing the Colonel to fire hot shot at his own home. A British officer scrounging for food in the pantry got shot. His blood seeped into the wooden floor, and it was always there. It never came out. The carnage was not for the faint of heart, and not for a pregnant woman blooming with my first child, my son, Sir George Prevost, named after the British general. Folks say it was Tom's doing to name our child after the Colonel's enemy, but it was mine. It was like a sliver of glass sticking in my master's craw. My George was born 28th December, 1814, 4 days after the Treaty of Ghent. He favored me, had my complexion, that made some dub me Black Maria. My precious daughter Caroline was born 15th of June, 1816, and she was as fair as my husband Thomas. On June the 22nd, the Colonel files his entitlement to both of my children, Sir George Prevost and Caroline, in the Plattsburgh Minutes book. How can one man own another man's children? I don't understand. After Commodore McDonough's signal victory against the British, Plattsburgh held a big to-do for him on the 23rd of September, 1814. Guess who baked the cake? President Monroe visits Plattsburgh on the 28th of July, 1816, and is escorted to Mistress Anne's father's tavern. The president reviews the troops, inspects the barracks, and visits the Army hospital. He attends a party at the colonel's brother's, Captain Smith's home. Guess who baked the cake? The colonel is recommended as a suitable candidate for the New York Assembly on the 28th of March, 1818. 5 months later, after a long and tedious illness, the colonel dies on the 28th of March. The Brinckerhoff house is draped in crepe. There's mourning and chaos inside. Mistress Anne frees me and my children. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, free at last. I can now make my own money as a nursemaid, cook, and baker of fine cakes for Plattsburgh's fancy folk. The colonel's business partner, Levi Platt, takes over the house. Mistress Anne, Missy Elizabeth, and Master Mel moved to her parents' home. In 1821, Master Mel, 11, moves to live with Mistress Anne's sister, Deborah Beaumont, and her husband, Dr. William Beaumont, who was acquainted with the colonel during the War of 1812. That family was torn asunder. Thomas, me, and our children live between the Folkhay Hotel and the steamboat landing. It is a humble dwelling, but it is ours. I was an original member of the Methodist Episcopal Church in Plattsburgh. Our leader was David Brock, and members included Sheldon Durkee, Ann Durkee, Mary Bacon, Polly Averill, Patience Miller, John Wells, Michael Dermott, John Adams, Felina Brock, Phoebe Edgerton, Ann Smith, and Mr. and Mrs. Joseph I. Green. Until 1831, we met in the courthouse. I sat in the Negro pew, and I walked alone to the table of our Lord, and I was grateful. I was free. I was free. My husband's barbering thrived, and George took up the trade too. Carolyn, a lady's maid, was regularly in my company catering to Plattsburgh's finest ladies. When Carolyn was 15, my baby girl died. From Bridge Street to Riverside Cemetery, townsfolk stood or joined behind George and I as we walked behind her funeral bier with my dead daughter in a coffin. The colonel's children, Mistress Anne and Mary Katie, joined the procession on Margaret Street near McKee Hotel. Folks knowing I'm a devout Methodist sang hymns to comfort me. They sang, "Why should we mourn departed friends or shake at death's alarms?" In 1835, Mistress Anne moves to Green Bay, Wisconsin. 4 years later, I removed my membership to the Keysville Methodist Church. I leave behind old friends, Mercy Thomas, Caroline Crabtree, and Harmon Thomas. The other black faces I knew in town were Diana Robinson and her boys, the eldest one, Lafayette Mason, who fought in the Adirondack Regiment during the Civil War. Others came to town to do their dealing, like the William Tankard and George Tankard and their children who lived in Beekmantown. Martin Tankard was the most famous melt master at the Crown Glass Works in Redford. Here in Keysville, I met new acquaintances like Mr. Wendell Lansing, Peter Keyes, Oliver Keyes, kin to those Keyes surveyors Zephaniah Platt hired, who established the Quaker Union. Thomas A. Tomlinson Esquire lives above me on Kent Street, and Oliver Keys is up there all the time. I'm not the only black folk here. There's Ben and Tamer Lewis. He's a whitewasher, and she is a cook. But she doesn't have my touch for the cakes. Jude Phillips and his brood of 7 live here, as well as Tom and Lucy Brooks and their children, Margaret and Harry. Boat cook Charles James and his wife Martha and their 6 children reside here. John Moore, a steamboat cook, and his wife Mary have 4 daughters, Charlotte, Anna, Maria, and Hannah. Edward Weeks, one of those Garrett Smith land grantees, lives here too. His baby girl is buried right over there, across the road, in the old cemetery. There's a lot that goes on in these parts that I am not at liberty to speak about. There's a lot that floats on the Sable River besides driftwood. Black Maria keeps watch. I lived to see General Robert E. Lee surrender at Appomattox. I lived long enough to see all black people, even in Texas, be free. I never knew my birthday, but today, June 19th, is as good as any, don't you think?
Yeah.
Well, good day to you kind folks, and may the good Lord bless and keep you.